Hello guys, welcome to the Sysadmin Tutorials YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Veeam Backup and Replication version 10. In this demo, we'll be setting up some of the new features that have been implemented in a VMware vSphere backup job. And we'll also be taking a look at the brand new NAS backup feature, where we'll be backing up a SMB Share from a NetApp simulator. This demo will be broken up into two parts. This video being the first part, where we're going to concentrate on creating the backup job and also running the backup job for the first time. The second part, which is going to be a new video, is going to concentrate on performing VM restores and also NAS file level restores. So as you can see up on screen here, we have our Windows 2016 server. And upon this server, we have installed the Veeam Backup and Replication software. Now I'm going to double click on the icon here. And we're going to connect to our VBR server. As you can see up on screen here, I am running the trial version of Veeam Backup and Replication version 10. And I do only have 4 days remaining of this trial license. The good news for you guys is that you can also head on over to www.veeam.com. And I will put that link in the description below of this video. And from there, you can download the software and obtain a trial license as well, so that you can try all that I'm showing you today in your labs. I'm going to click OK here. Now, just before we create our first VM backup job, I'm going to put a diagram up on screen, and that's going to show you how I have this lab set up. If we start on the left-hand side of the diagram, you can see that we have our vCenter server there called VLab-A-VC1. And within this vSphere environment, we have two virtual machines. One virtual machine being Windows Server 2016, and that is called Web Server 16. And the second one with Windows Server 2019, and that is called Web Server 19. If we move over to the NetApp object in the center, you can see that we're running a CIFS server, and the CIFS server is called VLab-A-CIFS1. And within that CIFS server, we have a share called CIFS_documents. And then we have two folders. So we have a NetApp documentation, and we also have a Veeam documentation. So within there is just a couple of PDFs from user guides, etc. On the right-hand side, you can see that we're running min.io, which is an object storage application. And within min.io, we're going to be creating two buckets. So the first bucket is going to be the Veeam VM archive. So that's where we're going to be archiving our virtual machines. And the second one is going to be the Veeam file archive. So this is where we're going to be archiving our SMB shares. Now, if we focus our attention to the top of the diagram, you can see that we've got our Veeam Backup and Replication version 10 server. And that's a server with IP address 192.168.1.231. Within that server, you can also see on the diagram that we've got a scale-out backup repository. And within that scale-out backup repository, we have two REFS LUNs. On the left-hand side of the diagram, where you see the dotted line with the arrows, that means that we've got a connection from the Veeam backup server to the vCenter server. And if you move along to the center, we also have a connection from the Veeam server to the NetApp CIFS server. On the right-hand side, where you see the dotted line going from the scale-out backup repository down to the min.io object storage, just highlights that we're using the min.io object storage as archive tiers. Now I'm going to minimize the network diagram. And here we are in the Veeam backup console. So I just want to show you two things that I've done so far. If we click on inventory on the left-hand side, you can see here that I've already added my vCenter server. Now to add a vCenter server, you can click on the Add Server button on the top left-hand side. You can select VMware vSphere. And you have two options. You can either enter in a vCenter server, or you can point directly to a vCloud Director cell. So we're going to be just using the VMware vSphere option. And here you enter in your DNS name or IP address of your vCenter server. And on the next screen, you enter in your credentials. The second one that I've added in here is the file shares. So here I have my NetApp SMB Share. To add in a file share, you can click on the Add File Share button at the top left-hand side. You can type in the shared folder path and also the credentials that you're using to connect to the CIFS server. But what I'll do is I'll cancel this one and I'm going to edit my one that I've added in so I can show you everything filled in. So you can see here, this is my full shared folder path. So you've got the server / and then the share name, which is sifs_documents. And then I've also got my credentials. And now we'll take a look at the advanced options by clicking on the advanced button. Here we have 3 options. You can back up directly from the file share itself. However, locked files will be skipped. If you have notifications enabled, you will see which files were skipped within the notification. The second option is backing up using a Microsoft VSS snapshot. However, the requirement for this is that you must be using SMB version 3 file shares. And the last option is we can back up directly from storage snapshots. So I'm going to leave mine on backing up directly from the file share, and I'm just going to click on cancel. Because I've only got one Veeam server, this Veeam server also acts as the proxy server. So I'm going to leave the first option of file proxy set to all proxies. However, if you do have multiple proxies in your environment, you can click on the choose button and specify individual proxy server here. For the cache repository, I do have a separate repository specifically for the file cache. And I'm going to show you all my repositories just in a second, and that'll include the scale-up backup repository as well. Now you want to be placing the file level cache as close to the file server as possible. Now within my lab environment here, it's all on the same network, so I'm happy to use the Veeam server as the file cache repository as well. The next option is backup I/O control. So with backup I/O control, we can either have faster backups, and that's just going to use a higher thread count through to the CIF server, or we can have a lower impact to the CIF server, meaning that your backups will probably run a little bit slower, but you'll have much less impact on your CIF server. So I've set mine to about 1/4 here. And then basically you just click on apply and your CIF server and share is added into the Veeam Backup console. Now I'm just going to cancel this one. And now we're going to take a look at our backup repositories. So to do that, I'm going to click on Backup Infrastructure on the left side. And I'll click on Backup Repositories. Now I have 4 backup repositories, each one mounted directly to this Veeam server via LUNs. The first repository is the config backups. So this is the Veeam config backups. They get written here each night and are encrypted. The second repository is the file cache. So this is the cache that we need to locate as close to the file share as possible. And this was used when we added the file share to our inventory. Now what I've decided to do is I've deleted my previous scale out backup repository, and that was the one I was using in the lab previous to this video. So I want to show you guys how to set up a scale out repository from scratch. So to do that, we'll click on scale out repositories on the left hand side. We'll right click on it and select add scale out backup repository. We'll give our scale out backup repository a name. So I'm just going to be calling mine SOBR, and we'll click next. And here we'll add the extents. So we're going to add in our SOBR-1 and SOBR-2 LUNs. And click OK. We'll then just click on the advanced button down the bottom right. And you want to make sure that you've got the use per VM backup files option selected. As you back up multiple virtual machines within the same backup job, it's going to place those virtual machines into individual folders within the repository. And as you can see in the description there, it does improve performance and also reduces backup storage. The second setting there, you do have the option to perform a full backup if one of the extents goes offline, but that does require more storage space. And for this lab, I'm going to be leaving that option unticked. So I'll click on OK. And we'll click on Next. For the placement policy, we have 2 options here. Option number 1, we can keep the full backup and the incrementals on the same extent. And option number 2, we can keep the full backup on one extent and the incrementals on another extent. Now for this lab, I'm going to be keeping mine as data locality. So full backups and incrementals will be going to the one extent. I'll click on Next. Here we have the capacity tier. So with the capacity tier, I'm going to come back and configure this because we first need to set up our S3 storage buckets. So I'll click on apply here and we'll be creating the scale out backup repository. The scale out backup repository has been created successfully, so I'll click on finish. And now we'll click on backup repositories to add our S3 buckets. To add the S3 bucket, I'm going to click on add repository at the top left hand side. And I'm going to select object storage. For my min.io object storage, I'm just going to select S3 compatible. And for the name, I'm going to name this repository the same as my bucket. So it'll be Veeam-VM-archive. And we'll click next. For the service point, this is just the URL for the min.io server. So that's going to be min.io-vmlab.local and port 9000. For the region, I'm just going to type in vmlab-a. And for the credentials, I'm going to click on add. The access key is kind of like the username and the secret key is kind of like the password. So I'll enter in those two here and I'll click on OK. We don't need to select the gateway option down the bottom of the screen here as the Veeam backup server is on the same network as the min.io object storage. So we'll just click on next. I'm using a self-signed certificate in the min.io server, so I'm just going to click on continue here. Now for the bucket, I'm just going to change that to the Veeam VM archive bucket. And next, under folder, we're going to click on browse. And I'm going to click on new folder. Here, I'm just going to type in archive. And I'll click on OK. Now here we have two options. We can limit the object storage consumption by ticking this box here and changing the value here. We also can change to terabytes or petabytes. I'm going to leave it unticked for my demo. The second option is we can make the backups immutable by clicking here and adding in how many days you want to make the backups immutable for. So what this means is there's an object lock within the S3 storage, and those backups cannot be modified, deleted, or tampered with for the next X amount of days. Now to support this option, your object storage needs to support object lock. There are only a handful of vendors that support object lock at the moment, and the vendors that do support it, I'm going to put up on screen right now. Unfortunately for this demo, my min.io object storage does not support object lock at this stage. So I'm going to untick this option and we'll click on next. A short summary of the object storage repository is presented on screen here. You can now go ahead and click on the finish button. Our Veeam VM Archive S3 bucket is now available as a backup repository. So what I'll do now is I'm going to go through the same process and I'm going to add in the Veeam-File-Archive S3 bucket. Now that we've got our two S3 buckets set up, we're going to return back to our scale out backup repository and go into properties. I'm going to click on the capacity tier. I'm going to enable extend scale out backup repository. And here I'm going to select a Veeam VM archive. Now I'm going to move this window just off to the right hand side. And on the left-hand side, I'm just going to bring up the options that were available to us in Veeam 9.5. On the right-hand side, you can see that the difference here is that we've got this copy backups to object storage as soon as they are created. The move backups to object storage as they age out of the operational restore window was available in 9.5 already. So I'm going to untick that and we're going to try out the new copy backups to object storage as soon as they are created. Now I forgot to mention up here we've got a window button. So we can define when objects get copied across to the S3 bucket. So imagine that if your S3 bucket was in Amazon, for example, you may not want to transfer objects across during business hours. You may want to do it after hours. So within here, you can specify which hours are permitted and which hours are denied. So I'll be leaving mine as default. And guys, anything that goes outside of your organization, I highly recommend that you enable the encryption option here. So any backup data that goes out to our S3 bucket is going to be encrypted. Now I'll click on the add button. Now it's really important that you keep a copy of your password in your password repository and even potentially a second copy offsite somewhere else in an encrypted vault or something like that. So you can add a password hint here and then you can actually type the password here and click OK. Okay, now we're going to click on apply and we'll click on finish. So now you can see that our S3 bucket is tied into our scale out backup repository. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create our vSphere VM backup job. So I'm going to click on home on the left hand side. And at the top left hand side at backup job, we're going to click on that and select virtual machine. We'll give this backup job a name and we'll click on next. For virtual machines to backup, we'll click on add. And at the top right hand side of the window here, we have a few options where we can select the objects that we're going to be backing up with. So for example, now we're on the hosts and clusters view. We can select the VMs and templates view. We've then got the data stores and VMs, and we've then got tags as well. So I'm actually going to select the VMs and templates view. And I'm simply going to be selecting all VM servers within the servers folder. So I'll just select servers folder and I'll click on add. So any VMs that come into that servers folder are going to automatically be backed up. So we'll click on next. And I'm going to move the window to the right hand side again because here there's a few changes compared to version 9.5. So I'll bring the 9.5 one up on the left hand side, and on the right hand side we'll have the Veeam version 10 option. First up we have the backup proxy. So I'm going to leave mine on automatic selection because I've only got one backup proxy, but you can click on choose and manually select which proxy you wish to use for this backup job. Secondly, we have our backup repository. So I'm going to drop that down and I'm going to be selecting our scale out backup repository here. Next, you have the retention policy. For the retention policy, Veeam version 10 has two options now. So you can select restore points or days. So if you want to try to maintain 7 days of restore points, depending on your backup schedule, if you're backing up just once a day and you select 7 and then restore points, you can achieve around 7 days retention of your backups. But what if you're backing up multiple times a day? So if you're backing up multiple times a day, you would want to select the days option and then 7 here to retain a weekly retention. The next new option in Veeam version 10 is the keep certain full backups longer for archival purposes. If we enable this option, you can see that we can add a GFS retention policy. So GFS stands for grandfather, father, son retention. And if we click on the configure button, you can see that we've got options to keep retentions for weekly, monthly, and yearly. If we select the first option here and we set it to for weekly, that means it's going to keep 4 weekly full backups in the repository, regardless of the retention policy here being 7 days. For this demo, I'm just going to set it to 1 week because I just want to demonstrate and show you guys where it marks the flag in the repository. So I'll show you that later, but for now, let's keep it set on 1 week and we'll click on OK. We also have the option to configure a secondary backup destination for like a backup copy job. We won't be doing that in this demonstration. So we'll move on to the advanced options. Now within the advanced settings, I want to make sure that I've got incremental selected. And because we're using REFS with the underlying LUNs of our scale out backup repository, I'm going to select create synthetic full backups periodically. Now what this does is when it comes time to create a full backup, it's going to check to see if the blocks exist in the scale out backup repository LUNs. And if the block does exist, it then doesn't need to copy it from the source. The source being through vCenter and the virtual machine. So this is called fast cloning, and it dramatically reduces the backup window. Now I'm just going to click on days, and I want my full backup to run on Sunday. So I'll untick Saturday and select Sunday, and we'll click on OK. The other options that are here I'm going to leave as unticked. We'll click on the maintenance tab. For our demonstration, I'm not going to select to perform a backup files health check, but the option is here if you wish to use it. The next option that I'm going to select here is remove deleted items after X amount of days. I'm going to set mine to remove them after 3 days. And lastly here you have an option to defrag and compact the full backup file. I'm not going to be using that option in the lab, so we'll move on to the storage tab. For the storage efficiencies, these first 3 options at the top, I'm going to leave them all ticked. And for the compression level, I'll be leaving it as optimal. For storage optimization, I'm going to leave it as local target because I have my LUNs mounted directly to my Veeam backup server. And lastly, we have an option to encrypt the backup files, which are going to be stored on the scale-out backup repository. For this demonstration, I'm going to leave that unticked, and we'll move to Notifications tab. For the Notifications tab, we can send SNMP alerts, we can send an email to a recipient notifying you if the job was successful or not. And lastly, we can also change the VM attributes on the virtual machine. So I might tick that. Once we run the backup, we'll have a look at the notes and we'll see what Veeam puts into that later on. We'll click on vSphere. The first option, we can enable VMware tools quiescing. I'm going to leave that unticked. The next option, we've got our change block tracking. So we'll enable change block tracking for all protected virtual machines. And what this means is when Veeam performs a backup via vCenter to the VM, if any blocks have already been copied to the backup repository, it won't recopy them. Only blocks that have been changed since the last backup are copied. This method also helps to reduce the backup window. The next option, which is new to Veeam version 10, is the reset change block tracking on each active full backup automatically. So if you're experiencing any issues with change block tracking, you can enable that. For my lab, I'm going to untick it just to reduce my backup window. Let's click on Integration tab. The options available here allow you to back up directly from a storage snapshot. So for example, if you have NetApp storage and you've got a volume set up there, which is actually a data store within VMware vSphere, when Veeam Backup runs, it can trigger a snapshot on the NetApp volume and then back up directly from the NetApp volume snapshot. And this just allows the backups to pull directly from the storage system without going directly through VMware vSphere. Now, because we're using VM snapshots in this demonstration, I'm going to untick this option. And we'll just have a look at the Scripts tab. The script options here allow you to run scripts before or after the job. And you can also run the scripts every X amount of backup sessions and run the scripts only on selected days. So we don't have any scripts to run in this demo, so we'll just click on OK. And we'll click on Next. Now we have the guest processing options here. The first one being Enable Application Aware Processing. So this is going to create a consistent backup of applications such as SQL, Exchange, Oracle. The second option is to enable guest file indexing. When this is enabled, a catalog of guest files is created, which allow you to browse and search for individual files. I'm not going to be using any of these options within our demonstration here, so I'm just going to click on Next. So now we have the options to configure a schedule. I'm going to click on Run the Job Automatically, and I'm going to keep it at 10 p.m. and running every day. We also have some retry options here. So if the job fails, it's going to retry 3 times, but in between those times, it's going to wait 10 minutes. And then we can also terminate the job if it exceeds the backup window. So say for example, you start work at 9 o'clock and you do not want your backups running over 9 o'clock. We can select to terminate the job just at 9 o'clock, and then therefore it won't be placing any stress on your production systems. So I'm going to click on apply. And we have a short summary of the job here. We'll click on finish. And here we have our first backup job. So I'm going to right click on the backup and I'm going to click start to start the first backup straight away. Now that's going to take a couple of minutes to run. So what I'll do is I'll pause the video, and then when we come back, we're going to have a look at the backup files within the scale out backup repository. And then we're also going to have a look at the files within the object store as well. All right, so I'll pause the video and be back shortly. All right, guys, we're back and the backup job has now successfully completed. If we have a look in the action window here, we can see that the change block tracking is enabled. We've got our 2 virtual machines that were backed up. And you can see here that with the GFS archive option that we selected in the backup job, that it's keeping 2 full backups from Sunday, March the 15th, which is today, as weekly GFS restore points. So the reason why it's 2 is because there's 2 virtual machines in there. So each one of those full backups have been marked as GFS. And I'm going to show you that in just a sec. We've got the load, the processing, where the bottleneck was, and the job finished at 1:46. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go over to our object storage on the left-hand side of the screen. And within the object storage, you can see that we've got the name of the backup job. And if we expand that, we've got the weekly full backup here. So now that we have a copy in our object storage, we'll go back to the original disk, which is just on the left-hand side here. We've got the backup job name and we've got the 2 VMs listed underneath. If we right-click on the backup and we go to properties, we can see here that we've got the 2 virtual machines, and on the right-hand side in retention, we can see that the GFS option has marked it with W, meaning that it is a weekly retention. So I'm going to close this window. And now we're going to take a look at creating a file level backup using our NetApp SMB Share. So we'll click on Jobs. And at the top left-hand side, we'll click on Backup Job. And we'll select File-Share. For the job name, we'll call it NetApp File-Share Backup. And we'll click on Next. I'll click on the Add button on the right-hand side. From here, we can select our file share that we wish to back up. If we expand the folders, you can see in there that we've got our NetApp documentation and our Veeam documentation. If you don't want to select the root share, you can also select the folder or individual files. So I'll be selecting the root level where it says sifs_documents, and I'll click on OK. If we click on the file share, we can then click on Advanced button down the bottom right. Here we can specify some filters to include or exclude certain files. You can see that Veeam has picked up that this is a NetApp SIF server by the exclusion of the ~snapshot and the .snapshot directory. So this is a directory within NetApp that gets populated with the NetApp snapshots of the volume. So we don't want to be backing up those snapshots. So Veeam has put that in as an exclusion, which is really good. So we'll click on OK. And we'll click on the Next button. For our file level backups, we're going to be storing these in our scale out backup repository. So that is already selected under backup repository here. We then move on to keep all file versions for the last X amount of days. So for our lab, I'm going to select 1 day, and it'll just keep the 1 day's worth of restore points. So I can either have my schedule running once a day, or I can have it running multiple times a day. And if I have it running multiple times a day, so let's say 4 times, I'll be able to go back to any of those 4 restore points and be able to recover files from. So I'm just going to leave it for 1 day for this demo. And then we come over to the archiving section. So I'm going to click on Keep Previous File Versions, and we're just going to set it to 1 month, but you can also drop down this and set it to years as well. And if we look at the description for this, so this archives older versions of active and permanently deleted files after they are no longer covered by the recent version's retention policy. So the recent version retention policy is this policy up here of 1 day. Now the archive repository, we are going to select our Veeam file archive. So if you remember, this is the S3 object storage. Let's have a look at an example. When we perform our first backup, a backup will be created in our scale out backup repository. The backup will continue to backup any changed or modified files. This creates a backup file version. When a file is deleted, it is marked as a deleted file within the backup. After the 1 day retention has expired, files that were modified or deleted are moved to the archive repository, where they will reside for 1 month. Only files and folders can be restored from the archive repository. You cannot restore the entire share to a point in time from the S3 backup archive. Files to archive are set to all. Let's just go click on Choose button. For files to archive, I'm going to leave these on all files. So in the share, I've got PDF and text files. So both of those are going to be archived off to S3 object storage. And you also have an option here for active file versions and deleted file versions to set a kind of retention or a limit on those so that you don't fill up your S3 object storage. I'm going to leave those turned off for my demo, and we'll click on OK. Now we'll click on the Advanced button. In the ACL Handling tab, you can see that we've got 2 options here. The first option being that we can back up the folder level permissions, and the second option is that we can back up the folder and file level permissions. You can see here on the option and in the brackets that it is marked as slower for files and folder, and that's just because it takes a bit more time and processing to go through each file and have a look or read its file level security permissions. So for this demo, I'm going to leave mine on folder level only, and we'll move over to the storage tab. Here we have the compression level. If I drop down the box here, you can see that we've got quite a few options. I'm going to be leaving mine on optimal, recommended. And then we have our encryption options. So I'm going to be turning encryption on for this, and I'll set the password that I set last time. And the reason for turning the encryption on here is to firstly encrypt our file level backups, and also that when it does get sent to the S3 object storage, it does go through as encrypted. We'll now click on the Maintenance tab. And similar to the virtual machine backup job, we have an option to perform backup files health check. I'll leave this unticked just for our demonstration. We then have the Notifications tab, which displays pretty much the same settings as we had on our virtual machine backup. And lastly, we have the Scripts tab, where we can run some scripts before or after the backup job. So I'm going to click OK here and Next. Here we have the option to send the backups to a secondary target location. So if I click on Add, you can see that a list of repositories that are available for the secondary target are displayed here. We won't be using secondary repositories in our demonstration, so we'll just go ahead and click on Next. Here we have the backup schedule. So I'm just going to enable the schedule, and we're going to run this at 9 PM every day. We'll leave the automatic retry set to the defaults here, and we'll click on Apply to create the job. A short summary is displayed of the settings that we've applied so far, and we can click on Finish. Now I'm going to select my backup job, and I'll right click it, and I'm going to click Start to trigger the first backup. So like the virtual machine backup, this might just take a couple of minutes. So I'm going to pause the video and I will resume it once the backup is completed. Okay guys, so the file level backup has now successfully completed. We can see that the backup file was encrypted here, and we can also see that it has backed up 2 folders and 10 files. On the left hand side, if we click on Disk, we can now see that the NetApp File-Share backup is available. And if I right click on that and select Properties, on the left hand side you can see that we have our File-Share object. If I click on that, then on the right hand side you can see we've got our first restore point, which was created today. And as the time ticks along and the schedule kicks in and creates multiple restore points, they are going to be available or listed here. And that even includes the archive one where the files go off into the S3 object storage. So we'll see that in part 2 of this video series when we go to restore some files and folders. But for now, we'll just click on OK. And just one other thing to take note of is if you have a look at the NetApp File-Share backup job name, you can see that we've got like a little golden key on the backup job. So that means that this backup is encrypted. So thank you very much guys for taking the time to watch part 1 of this video series. We'll see you again in part 2 where we go and have a look at restoring virtual machines and file and folders with Veeam version 10.